Over Labor Day weekend, LaRouche published a critical intervention, Unsurvivable, which details the scope of the thermonuclear war which Barack Obama would launch should he remain Commander-in-Chief. If you've not yet seen that piece, I urge you to do so right now and to send a link to everyone in your network.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Along with elements within Russia and China, the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States have been fighting for well over a year to keep Obama from launching a war of extinction. Leading into this past Labor Day weekend, these patriots made another critical intervention into the rapidly deteriorating strategic situation in the Middle East. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, in his visit to England and a subsequent visit to Ireland, made it clear that there is no active operation to enforce a no-fly zone in Syria, citing the frequent comparison between the United Nations imposed no-fly zone in Libya and the situation today in Syria as, at best, a source of amusement. He also went on to define some of the problems which would confront NATO should they make that decision. If you choose to establish one, you would assume the responsibility for protecting it. If you're tasked to protect it, you have to look at those who might seek to attack it or to influence it, and that could take you, depending on weapon systems, it could take you to a limited no-fly zone, it could take you to the point of having to interdict air and ballistic missile systems. What was left unsaid is that a deployed capability to interdict ballistic missile systems over Syrian airspace will have serious implications for Russian defense. General Dempsey was backed up by former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of State Colin Powell, who, also speaking from England, weighed in against a no-fly zone in Syria. On the same day that General Dempsey's intervention was carried by The Independent and The Guardian in Britain, United States Federal Representative Walter Jones issued an open letter to President Obama out of grave concern that he would once again lead our nation into war without authorization from the Congress. He goes on to detail part of his House Concurrent Resolution 107, which, by restating the federal Constitution, holds it to be an impeachable offense for the President to commit our nation to war without congressional approval. We've published that letter for distribution on the LaRouche site. This intervention comes at a crucial strategic moment. The Middle East is rapidly deteriorating to the effect of creating the conditions for Barack Obama to launch the intended thermonuclear confrontation which we detail in our LPAC feature, Unsurvivable. Again, I urge you to watch that production and to spread it widely. If we do not act to change this situation now, that is exactly where we are headed. The stage has already been set. Mercenaries and heavy weapons are being brought in from Libya to aid the armed insurgency in Syria, with the insurgency setting up the means of coordination and recruitment within Libya to accelerate that process. It is reported that Iran is sending in officers and soldiers to assist Assad, and there is talk of a more formal reinforcement operation as per a defense pact between Iran and Syria. The head of the Al-Quds Brigade of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has been officially appointed to coordinate support for the Syrian government. Egypt granted an Iranian naval ship passage through the Suez Canal bound for Syria with weapons, while in almost the same breath, Egypt's President Morsi, speaking in Iran at the Non-Aligned Movement Conference, denounced Assad's government as an oppressive regime and vowed solidarity with the insurgents. The Syrian foreign minister walked out of that conference until Morsi had finished. The head of Israeli military intelligence has submitted his annual threat assessment to the head of the Israeli Defense Forces. The general had the following to say to the reporters. In the coming year, the state of Israel will come up against an unstable, increasingly Islamic region, a region that has been dealing with a series of crises, regional and internal, that increase the volatility of all the players and that could lead, without prior warning, to conflagration. Netanyahu's Israel is adding to that volatility, having bombed several sites in Gaza, giving the reason that these were weapons factories and storage facilities. He is also threatening a new shock and awe type bombing campaign against Lebanon. Israel insists that Hezbollah has some 40 to 50,000 rockets there. And in spite of resistance among some elements in Israeli leadership and otherwise, Netanyahu continues to drive for a preemptive strike against Iran. John Scales Avery published a scenario of the outcome of such a strike. The planned attack on Iran would not only violate international law, but would also violate common sense and the wishes of the people of Israel. The probable result would be a massive Iranian missile attack on Tel Aviv, and Iran would probably also close the Straits of Hormuz. If the United States responded by bombing Iranian targets, Iran would probably use missiles to sink one or more of the U.S. ships in the Persian Gulf. One can easily imagine other steps in an escalation of the conflict: a revolution in Pakistan, the entry of a nuclear-armed Pakistan into the war on the side of Iran, a preemptive nuclear strike by Israel against Pakistan's nuclear weapons, and Chinese-Russian support of Iran. In the tense atmosphere of such a war, the danger of a major nuclear exchange due to accident or miscalculation would be very great. The danger of a catastrophic war with hydrogen bombs hangs like a dark cloud over the future of human civilization. The total explosive power of today's weapons is equivalent to roughly 500,000 Hiroshima bombs. What is threatened today is the complete breakdown of human society. The First World War was a colossal mistake. Today, the world stands on the threshold of an equally enormous disaster. Must we again be led into a world-destroying war by a few blind individuals who do not have the slightest idea of what such a war would be like? While Avery's scenario is a credible chain of events, Lyndon LaRouche has emphasized that any thermonuclear attack would come as if all at once, a full barrage as a first strike. Adding to the Balkan powder keg conditions of today's Middle East, Israel carried out a drone assassination 18 miles into Egyptian territory, marking an escalation of Israel's use of their drone capability, as previous strikes had been confined to Gaza. In June of this year, Barack Obama's use of drones was described as a war crime by Christoph Haynes, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, or arbitrary killings. As this present script is being written, at least 2 major U.S. drone attacks have killed 17 people in Yemen and Pakistan in the past 24 hours. 13 of the casualties were civilian. Barack Obama, the President of the United States, signs off personally on every drone strike. Bruce Fein, Associate Deputy Attorney General under President Ronald Reagan, wrote the following in an article titled "A Limitless Presidency." President Obama's uncircumscribed power to kill through drone strikes sits along numerous other usurpations. He maintains that entrustment of executive power to the President in Article 2 crowns him with authority to commence war at any time, in any place, for any reason. He unilaterally initiated war against Libya in violation of the Constitution and the War Powers Resolution. And don't expect Obama to seek congressional authorization, as required by Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10, if he chooses to unleash war against Iran, Syria, Yemen, Mali, Pakistan, North Korea, or China. With Barack Obama as Commander-in-Chief, the danger of war in Syria or Iran will not be confined to the region of the Middle East. Obama must not remain in command. The danger is a vast and uncontrollable escalation which will lead to a confrontation between the United States, Russia, and China, a confrontation which can only end in a thermonuclear exchange. This is the intended effect. Obama's intention is to start this war. This is the reality into which the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff intervened in his trip to the British Isles this past weekend, which Walter Jones addresses with his House Concurrent Resolution 107, and which we have detailed in the LaRouche Pack feature, Unsurvivable. This is the reality which every patriot must fight now to change.